All right, before this video narration starts, I want to say this was a request from one of the pony homies, Devil Eye. Look at that. He was all like, yo, Spearheart, you're so awesome and amazing. Can you please narrate my story? And I'm like, I'll do it. I'll do it. For a small price, of course. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, he sent me the story, and now this is it. So, spear that like button. No, you haven't even heard the fan fiction yet. Okay, roll the intro, please, voice, roll the intro, please.
We laugh for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we laugh because we're happy, and other times we laugh because we're scared. But for others, laughter is a thing you do to hide how you truly feel. Have you ever heard the saying, "One laugh per day helps keep the darkness away"? No? That's because very few ponies have heard of it. Mentally Pink and Gray. Written by Babycord. Chapter 1. Pain and Hopelessness. Author's note. Hi, so this is my very first story on this site. As such, I am very interested on your thoughts on it. I know it's far from perfect, but this was an idea I had for a while now. Feel free to point out any spelling errors. Every pony was quiet. Pinkamina's gaze was firmly locked on the table, absolutely refusing to meet any pony's gaze. The young foal felt her heart race with anxiety and fear. She knew that what was about to happen next wasn't going to be pretty. However, she also knew that there was no turning back now.
Well,
Cloudy Quartz questioned. The mare stood beside her husband on the other side of the table. Both ponies looked far from pleased. In fact, Cloudy was practically gritting her teeth in anger. In response, the pink mare slowly lifted her head up, her gaze filling with anger and defiance.
well, what?
She snapped. In the corner of her eye, she saw 4 sets of eyes peeking from around the corner, each one being filled with fear and concern. However, the pink mare didn't dare tear her gaze away from her parents. If she did, then her own sisters would share the very same fate she was about to endure. In the foal's mind, it was better this way. Better her than them. At least she could take what was coming next. For the most part, anyway. Upon receiving her response, Igneous Rock slams his hoof upon the table. The force was strong enough to leave a noticeable dent in its structure. The pink foal did her best not to visibly flinch.
Did you or did you not refuse to do any farm work?
The older stallion snapped. From the expression on his face, Pinkamena knew that there was no turning back now. Lifting her head, the foal said 2 words that practically sealed her fate.
Fuck you.
Silence. For several long seconds, Pinkamena waited for the inevitable. The expressions on her parents' face was one of utter shock. Their mouth hanging open and their eyes wide. They practically were the bare equivalent of a fish out of water. They looked so ridiculous that the pink foal couldn't help but laugh at their expressions. Big mistake. What happened next was something the pink foal didn't expect. 1 second, she was busy laughing her flank off, and in the next, she was on the floor, staring vaguely at the ceiling. The foal's vision swarmed as a fresh wave of pain exploded on the right side of her face. The pain was so intense that the foal had to bite her lip in order not to scream.
Get up! Get up!
Her father ordered. The stallion looked down at her, a mixture of rage and disappointment on his face. In response, Pinky spat a tiny mouthful of blood in his direction. A second later, she felt the large hoof strike her side. Pinkamena couldn't help but scream as she felt something break. The pink foal saw little black dots at the corner of her vision. Said dots quickly began to grow in size. However, just before she can pass out, some pony struck her in the face. Her mind immediately jolted back to consciousness. Upon opening her eyes, she saw the hate-filled eyes of her mother staring back down at her. Igneous stood by her side. His expression remained relatively the same as before. The foal was crying now, the pain being too much for her young mind to handle. Despite this, she glared back at her mother.
Would you like to apologize?
Cloudy asked coldly. The filly shook her head weakly. Gathering every ounce of strength she had left, Pinkamena spoke.
I wish you were dead.
Gritting her teeth, Cloudy raised her hoof. Pinkamena merely glared, refusing to look away. If she was gonna face her mother's wrath, then so be it. However, the pink foal also knew that she couldn't take much more. At least, not without a serious trip to the hospital. It was in this moment that she realized this could very well be her last day in Equestria. Oddly, that brought a sense of comfort to the foal. Maybe her pain would finally end. However, she also realized that if she indeed died here, then what would happen to the rest of her family? Nothing good. In fact, her younger siblings could be next up on the chopping block. That realization made her eyes go wide with fear. Screw her. Her life didn't matter in the slightest, but her siblings, they didn't deserve that type of fate. Just as she thought this, Cloudy brought her hoof down.
Wait!
Cloudy's hoof froze mere inches from her face. Looking over her shoulder, the mother saw two of her daughters standing at the kitchen's entrance, both of whom had tears running down their faces. Turning her head, Pinkamena stared at her sisters in horror. She tried to tell them off, but a new wave of pain stopped her from doing so. Looking back down at her daughter, Cloudy smirked.
Dear, how about you put Pinkamena here in the cellar?
Igneous nodded. Chuckling, Cloudy walked over to her two other daughters, who both had a look of utter terror on their faces.
Meanwhile, I'll teach these two a lesson in privacy. No! No!
The pink mare shouted, only to scream in pain as Igneous picked her up like a sack of bricks. Try as she might, Pinkamena couldn't escape his hold. At least, not without screaming in agony every time she did so. As the two made it outside, Pinkamena could do nothing but stare at the house in horror. It wasn't long before the screams started. Crying, the pink filly couldn't help but feel that everything was her fault. She failed to keep away the monsters that were her parents. She failed all of that and more. Bawling her eyes out, Pinkamena felt a crack in her psyche. However, that did little to distract her from current events. It didn't take long for them to arrive at their current destination. Once there, Igneous threw open the cellar door. The sight that greeted them was one of complete darkness. However, that alone didn't stop her father from slowly descending the stairs. Almost immediately, the smell of piss and shit hit them, and it hit them hard, so much so that Igneous nearly gagged in response. As they continued their descent, they began to hear sounds of movement coming from the bottom. Suddenly, the movement ceased, only for a pair of ear-piercing screams to take its place. However, that quickly morphed into humorless laughter. When Igneous was at the bottom step, he stopped. It was in that moment that a voice spoke. The voice itself sounded extremely young. However, something about it sounded off. It wasn't the voice of a rational pony. Rather, the voice itself sounded manic, like the pony was on a different world, far from their own.
Insects are eating my insides!
The voice yelled.
Spiders whisper in my sleep!
Both ponies heard hoofsteps coming towards them.
In the dark, Hanged Mare speaks!
Suddenly, the tone of the voice changed, sounding much more naive and innocent.
Why does Mommy and Daddy love us?
The voice changed again. This time, it sounded rasp. It also had a clear tone of anger behind it.
Because they hate every single one of us!
A pony steps into their point of view. This pony was a colt with a coat and mane just as dark as the night itself. He looked extremely skinny and malnourished. Despite this, he stood on all four hooves with little difficulty. His eyes were a mixed color. One was a light green, while the other was a dark blue. Both eyes, however, burned with an anger never before seen on a colt's face.
And I hate them too,
he seethed. Suddenly, he blinked and his expression changed. Instead of anger, he had a blank look on his face.
Insects are eating my insides,
he mumbled.
In the dark, the Hanged Mare speaks.
Igneous just shook his head in disgust.
Damn demon child,
he mumbled. Deciding he's seen enough, Igneous dropped Pinkamena onto the cold, hard floor. The pink mare screamed in agony, having been unfortunate to land on the wrong side. The colt flinched before immediately running to her side. Igneous, on the other hoof, turned and made his escape.
Hey, are you okay?
The colt asked. Tears were running down his face upon realizing just how much pain she was in. Pinkamena didn't respond. Instead, she reached out weakly towards the colt. For his part, he immediately understood what she wanted. Very gently, as if he was holding a fragile flower, the colt hugged his sister.
Sister?
Being careful not to put pressure onto her body.
It's my fault!
She wailed. Just as she spoke, the sound of a door being slammed shut could be heard. Immediately, both younglings were surrounded in complete darkness. In that darkness, Pinkamena cried, and in that darkness, the colt's voice can be heard as clear as day.
In the dark, the hanged mare speaks.
The end.
Holy Scheisenbergs! Babycord, I mean, there was some errors in here, but other than that, bro, I mean, this story feels good. It feels good. Like, look, I'm gonna drop chapter 2. What am I gonna drop chapter 2? Tomorrow? Question mark? I don't know. I'll drop chapter 2 in a few days. But in the meantime, spear that like button. Spear that like button. Oh, this is a good story.